Hello, and thank you for pushing play and joining us in our little corner of the online universe. Welcome to State of the Arts, a podcast which is supported by Fís Éireann, Screen Ireland, through the Screen Stakeholders Funding Scheme. I'm Des Doyle, a writer, director, and creative consultant with more than 25 years' experience in the worlds of film and TV production, and I will be your host as every 2 weeks we bring you a new episode which will focus on someone who's been extremely successful in their chosen medium and will be both a look at their creative careers and current upcoming projects, as well as their take on some of the major news stories currently having an impact in their field of artistry. There will be 6 episodes in season 1 of the pod, and if you would like us to do more than that, then please add us to your playlists. Follow us on our Instagram at SOTAPod, that's SOTAPOD, and help us spread the word about the show. And of course, please let us know what you like and what you might like us to change as we go along. Today's guest on State of the Arts is the hugely successful US writer, producer, showrunner Shawn Ryan. Shawn was born and raised in Rockford, Illinois, and graduated from Middlebury College, where he began writing plays. After moving to Los Angeles, Shawn was staffed on the TV series Nash Bridges and Angel before creating and showrunning the broadcast network FX's first original drama, The Shield. For his work on The Shield, Shawn received a Golden Globe for Best Drama, an Emmy nomination for writing, a Peabody Award, and 2 AFI awards. Other shows that Shawn has created, co-created, or showrun include The Unit, The Chicago Code, Terriers, Last Resort, Mad Dogs, Timeless, SWAT, The Night Agent, and the forthcoming series American Hostage. Shawn has served on the board of directors for the WGA West and was co-chair of the WGA Negotiating Committee in 2020. This episode of State of the Arts contains spoilers for The Night Agent Season 3. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today on State of the Arts. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, Des.
Could we start by talking about The Night Agent? Season 3 has just dropped on Netflix. The show has been a huge success so far. Season 1 is still in the top 10 global all-time shows that Netflix have done. And I just checked there earlier on today. It's in the top 3 in Ireland here today. So Irish audiences obviously enjoying the show as well. How did you become involved with the show? Because I believe this is the first time where you were doing a show that was adapted from previously existing material. Is that correct?
Well, I did SWAT, which was based on a previous series in the 70s, and there were a couple of development projects where that were based on books that didn't get made. But this is the first series I've had on the air that was based on a book. I got involved when Jamie Vanderbilt, who's a terrific writer himself and a director, he just wrote and directed Nuremberg, if you've seen that. His production company approached us. This was right before COVID started. It was in March of 2020, just a week or so before all the lockdowns happened. And we were talking about if there was anything that our two companies could do together. And at the very end of that lunch meeting, he mentioned that they had the rights to this book called The Night Agent that they weren't sure what to do with. When the lockdown happened the next week, I found myself with a lot of free time that I didn't have before that. And I ordered the book on Amazon and I read it in 2 days. And something happened that doesn't usually happen when I read books. What happened was that almost immediately, I knew which parts of the book belonged in a TV show and which parts didn't. And I could sort of see immediately how I would attack it. Usually, with a lot of books, I think there's a lot of, boy, what would I keep? What wouldn't I? But I just found myself really thinking, oh, this is what I would take to make the series. For instance, there's this bombing on a DC Metro train that is referenced in the book, but does not open the book and is almost treated as something that's happened in his past. It's not part of the current day action. But I immediately thought, well, that's actually a really great opener for the series. The Peter Rose relationship was pretty intact, and I took a lot from that. But so I read the book and I called Jamie's company and said that I was interested in adapting it, and we took it to Sony, where my deal was at that time, and said, hey, I really would like to do this. And they worked out all the deals with Jamie's company and with Matthew Quirk, the author of the book. And it just came together very easily. And then what I said to Sony at that time was, rather than going out and pitching it, I'd really just like to write this. I see so much of it in my head sort of immediately that maybe that would accelerate the process. And it's always dangerous when you when you write a script and present that, because you get no's much more quickly than when you pitch things. But I find that you could also get a yes quicker if they really respond to it, and it kind of cuts through a lot of the development red tape. Do they like the story? Do they like the execution of the script? They're going to have to love it at some point to make it anyways. So I don't mind getting to that question earlier.
Is there a special sauce for a pilot script? Because you've written a huge number of pilots at this point in time. And is there something that you think you specifically need in a pilot script that's for a streaming service in this day and age to kind of get it over the finish line?
Well, those are two different questions, because I have thought a lot about how shows and pilots work in a streaming environment, versus broadcast television, which I've done, basic cable, premium cable, which I've done. Yeah, I think you have to find a really concentrated delivery of character and premise. People's attention spans are not super long, and you have to convince them pretty quickly that this new world that you're introducing them to and the characters that you're introducing them to are worthy of their time. I mean, there's so many other things people could be doing with their time than sitting and watching your show. So I always believe, and this was a sort of rule I adapted early, and I've amended it over the years, but I found that the sweet spot is if people can't tell like what the purpose of your show is by about page 17 of your script, you're in trouble. Now, I learned that lesson the hard way, because there were pilots where you clued the audience in like on about page 20 or 21, or at least I did. And then I'd get into the editing room and I'd realize that, oh, I've actually got to cut stuff at the beginning to get to the thing that A, makes clear to the audience what your show is really about, and B, makes them interested in that. So those are the keys, I would say. To your streaming question, I believe that this has always been important in pilots. How you leave the audience at the end of the pilot episode. You want people to really want more, and you want them to be intrigued and entertained and want to watch episode 2. In a streaming environment where episode 2 is immediately available, that becomes even more important, right? I think there are a lot of people that will give pilot episodes a shot, and then they're making the calculus. For us, we have 10 episode seasons on The Night Agent. The running time is about 8 1/3 hours of all 10 episodes. So now they've watched the first episode, and now they're making a mental calculation in their head. Is this worth another 7 to 7.5 hours of my time? Right. And the way that you conclude the pilot, the way, do they feel satisfied watching it? Do they feel an emotional connection to one or more characters that makes them want to watch? Do they feel like it was a good use of their time? It's something that I obsess over a lot. And it's something that, now I will say on The Night Agent, we had some conversations with Netflix, because I think their instinct is to try to end the pilot episode with something sort of based around your main character, which I think completely makes sense. But in this case, I'd written this sort of off-kilter scene that involved our 2 killers going into this woman's house, and with the female assassin pretending that she had lived there in her youth. And I had always felt from the moment I wrote that script that was a good curveball for the end of the episode, and like, oh, what's going on here? And so we did try some versions that ended on Peter and Rose, but their final scene sort of wasn't as strong, and I was able to convince them that my way was the right approach. But there is really outsized importance on episode 1 in a streaming series. Back 20 years ago, when I was making pilots for CBS or FX, the first episode was really important, but people who missed it would tune into episode 2 because they heard good things and they'd want to sort of see what was going on. Here, if people aren't impressed with episode 1 in a streaming series, they're never going to make it to episode 2. They're never going to get a chance. And so you've really got to put your best foot forward. As a result, when you're budgeting 10 episodes, you're taking some money out and giving some extra money to that first episode in terms of creating more time to film, having bigger action sequences along those lines. So, uh, I don't have a magic formula. No one does, because I can still screw up a pilot as well as anyone, given the opportunity. But I have learned some lessons over the years that I try hard to remember as I'm making a new one.
There are two things I've heard you say in relation to writing before that I was curious. One is the pace, energy, urgency trio. And then
Yeah.
the other one, which I think is really interesting as well, is what you call the money scenes.
Yeah.
Could you explain those two, maybe for people listening?
Sure. Again, attention spans, and I find myself guilty of this. I don't want to feel bored. I don't want to feel bored while watching a TV show. It doesn't mean that something that's slow paced is by definition boring. There are a lot of things that are really well made. They're slow paced. But what I find, the shows that I tend to do that have a bit of adrenaline to them, that tend to have high stakes, that your show has to be paced up. Now, what I will say is that there are scenes that do need to slow down. There are scenes that have special weight within an episode, and I do call those money scenes. Money scenes you have to treat differently in production. You've got to give them more time to film. You have to treat those scenes different editorially, where you do want to slow down and you do want to milk these moments. But if the scenes that come before it are paced too slowly, then your money scene itself just feels like a continuation of slow pacing. Whereas if your bread and butter scenes, your building block scenes are paced up, are energetic, and now I get to a moment where now I'm having my detective sit in front of the suspected killer in the interrogation room, and there's just 10 seconds of silence as they take each other in before the detective says something. That's like a meaningful moment. But if everything has been slow leading up to that, that just feels like more like, why can't you just get to the plot? So when you tell a show that has high stakes, the things I'm always talking to the directors and the actors about is, if your character doesn't care, why will the audience care?
Yeah.
Like, if this isn't important to you to like try to figure these moments out and try to do these things, the audience isn't going to follow. So yeah, I do tone meetings, and one of my things is pace, energy, and urgency. That doesn't mean that they all have to be at the same level. In fact, they never should. You don't want a show where everything is always at the same level all the time. But the baseline should feel like this is important. What the characters are doing is important. They feel it's important, and they're acting with urgency in their life the same way you or I would if we got a call that, hey, someone we know is in the emergency room. You wouldn't saunter over there. Do you know what I mean? You would sort of walk with some pace and energy and urgency. So I talk about that. And then, yeah, money scenes, to me, the way I define these for directors and tone meetings is, I say, pick your favorite show, whether it's Game of Thrones or The Shield or Mad Men, whatever it is. And let's say it's a show that's currently on the air, and you watch it, and you watch a specific episode. And a month later, I say to you, tell me everything you remember about that episode. You're not going to remember every scene that was in the episode. You're not going to be able to relay to me every scene, but you're going to remember the big moments. You're going to remember the impactful, when so-and-so revealed themselves to be a spy, or that action scene where this happened, or when so-and-so broke up with that. Those are the money scenes. Those are the scenes that people remember later on. And I have a theory about television episodes that goes something like this, that if every scene you make in an episode is good but not great, the audience will think it's okay. But if you make an episode where a lot of scenes are mediocre, but the money scenes are great, people will tend to love those episodes. So it's not an excuse for mediocre scenes. But what it means is that when I talk to directors before an episode begins, I'll identify the 4, 5, 6 money scenes. And what I'm saying is, we cannot screw up these scenes, and we cannot be mediocre on these scenes, right? Schedule and budget sometimes makes you compromise in areas as you're making TV shows. That's just a dirty little secret, right? I'm not James Cameron or Christopher Nolan making a movie where I can lavish just unbelievable amounts of attention on every scene. We have to pick our battles. And so I say, make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure that these money scenes turn out great.
There's a couple of those scenes because it feels like in season 3 of Night Agent that things are stepping up again, both in terms of scale of the show, but also that you're doing some like really interesting things in storytelling. So for me, right from the get-go, you've got a car chase scene at night in Istanbul that wouldn't feel out of place in a Mission Impossible movie, right? In the opening episode. But the arc and the characters that I found almost most intriguing in season 3 was the father-son and that relationship, because it plays out in such unusual ways. And for me, one of the money scenes that maybe you're talking about that I'm always going to remember is the interrogation scene between the father
absolutely.
and Peter.
And it's a series of scenes, and they're all money scenes. And I would add that the son with Peter later on in that same location. In fact, it's, you're validating a lot of what I believe in the show. I've said to a lot of people that's episode 8. And I've said to a lot of people, episode 8 is my favorite episode of the season, maybe my favorite episode of the series, in terms of the access that we get to Peter. And again, it's an example. If you look at the scenes that precede those, I'd like to think that they're really paced up and they have energy to them, so that when you come to this quiet moment in this darkened apartment, and it's just these two men and this IV with this drug that's going to make Peter increasingly less resistant to dishonesty, that you can milk those moments in really powerful ways.
That's a setup for a scene, if you like, that we've seen a lot of times in the past, but the way the scene plays out is very unexpected. And even the tone and the way it's played, I wonder how much of that is in the way it's written as well. Just, it completely subverts expectations when you're watching it.
Yeah, I think we steered away from, I think a very typical way to go would be sort of physical torture in a scene like that. We've seen the father have real intellectual curiosity with his son in the 7 prior episodes. I would say that Stephen Moyer, got that part because of his approach to that scene in the audition process. That was one of 2 scenes. The first scene with Peter and the father in episode 8, that was one of our 2 audition scenes for that character, for the father. And Stephen Moyer turned a self-tape in. He was somewhere in the UK filming and, had just gotten these sides, and with no conversations with us, turned in this self-tape that we all went, whoa. The approach that he's taking here, which is atypical, which is sort of different, he's leaning into the things we thought were subtly in the script, but a lot of other actors who are auditioning didn't really conquer. He had this sort of playfulness, and when he was talking about the drug, the blue 58, I forget what the number was, blue something, you could see the sort of, I have a chance to sort of talk about this cool piece of World War II history that I'm just sort of into, and I'm not sort of doing it a threatening way. A scene like that lives and dies by its tone, and Stephen had something from the very first audition tape that made us believe that he fully understood it. Because this was such a huge money scene, I knew how important it was. We actually had extra conversations and actually did some extra sort of read-throughs before filming. I'm not on set a ton, but I was on set as we were rehearsing, not for the filming of those scenes, but I was there a few days before they filmed, and we made extra time for those actors and the director to sort of sit down with me and talk them through, are these lines exactly how we want them? The actors gave a little feedback. We tweaked the lines. We talked about, what I was sort of looking for tone-wise in those scenes. And it's an example of when you identify a money scene and you give it the proper resources and the proper preparation, it's a scene that stands out and I think elevates the season as a whole as a result.
No, absolutely. It's fantastic. I've seen it described online as the anti-24 scene in relation to
one of the things I'm always trying to do is I'm always trying to think in terms of what haven't I seen on TV before, or what do I always see on TV and how can you subvert that? Right? So you take the tropes and you use audiences' expectations against them to sort of turn the table. So we've all seen across James Bond and Jason Bourne and 24. We've all seen these sort of bad guy has control over the good guy and wants information from him scenes. So that's a trope that exists in the political thriller. Going back to Marathon Man, famously with Olivier and Hoffman. So, but how can you play a scene like that people are used to seeing, but give them something new and fresh? We're always trying to challenge ourselves in that way.
One of the other things that I thought was exceptional about, and this is from a showrunning point of view of what you've done, especially with season 3 of the show, is that you're not writing out of the episodes in season 3, that episodes have been given out to all of your writers. Could you explain, maybe for people listening, why it's an unusual thing to do, and this isn't something that every showrunner is doing, but why you think it's so important, and why it's really important to continuing that kind of education of writers and giving them an opportunity to go to set and getting the production experience and so on?
Yeah, well, to be clear, other writers on staff have always written episodes during the season. I think the thing that got a little attention this year was I wasn't credited on any of the episodes. And that there were a couple of reasons. One, I'd originally written the pilot episode and then we sold it. And I was still figuring out the show myself. And so I chose to write episode 2 of season 1. And then I co-wrote episode 3 because that was me figuring out on an episode by episode basis what this show was. Season 2, we had a whole new production team. We moved filming from Vancouver to New York. We have a bunch of new characters. I felt it was important to write that first episode myself to begin to figure out what season 2 was. I felt that was successful the first 2 seasons. We get to season 3. And now I've got a pretty experienced writing staff who knows the show. We've all figured it out together. We know the characters. And I didn't feel the need to kind of use an episode to figure out what I was doing. The way my deal works, I work an overall deal. I don't actually get paid extra for writing the script, but my writers get paid extra when they write scripts. And so it was more sort of beneficial for them to have the episodes, and it allowed me to just take a more supervisory role. I'm handling a lot of things on production. I have things in development. I'm always working on multiple projects at once. So part of it's just time management. When I'm writing a script, I kind of just have to disappear for a week and not do anything else, which can stop the gears of the machine moving. And so it really comes from a place of finding total trust in my writers and allowing them to sort of write. I still, I'm in the room breaking stories with them. I'm approving of stories. I'm giving notes on scripts. I will make pen changes to the script. So I still see plenty of lines in the show that I wrote, but I'm not credited for. And I still feel like I have the level of control that I want to have over the show without taking singular responsibility for writing an episode. To the other part of the question you asked, the importance of having writers on set producing their episodes, I just think it's paramount. It makes them better writers. So one of the reasons these writers became so good at writing the show is that in season 1 and then into season 2, they went to set. They saw what happened when their words that they wrote intersected with real people actually saying them on location or on sets. And you start to develop a better ear when you actually hear actors saying your words and you start saying, oh, this sounded good in my head when I wrote it, but we can get rid of a couple words here, or I can make this little tweak. And so that experience, I think, is really valuable. Our shows have been on budget all 3 seasons, and one big reason why is that the writers work really closely with production, work with the directors, work with the actors. Especially on a very serialized show like this, where something that's said in episode 2 can have importance in episode 9. A lot of times in the grind of filmmaking, that's something that the actors or can forget, or a director of episode 2 isn't worried about episode 9, which he or she isn't directing. And so they're not thinking about this. And it's the writers who are there as a constant presence, who know the scripts inside and out, who are working to make sure there's some consistency. So I think writers produce their episodes makes better writers, makes for a better staff, makes for a better production, makes for a better show.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It seems like almost short-sighted in a way on the part of some of the streamers and studios out there anymore, that they don't seem to want to support this system in the same
Well,
way that they did
it's an
before.
obvious place to save money on the front end. I believe it costs you money on the back end. I don't have peer-reviewed studies to prove that, but I from my experience, I truly believe it's undeniable. And the vast majority of shows I've done have been on budget, and I'd like to think they've been of high quality. And it's in large part because of the writing staff that I surround myself with and the way that I empower them to, to help the production and help produce the episodes.
With the whole season being written in advance, even though the writers are spending on time on set, are there opportunities to adjust story as you go along, or would it be too complicated a process? Because there's an awful lot going on story wise in a show like Night Agent as well. Does it become too complicated to potentially correct anything down the line or change things as you go along?
It is complicated, but it's not too complicated. And if your goal is to make the best show you can, then you have to be open to the possibility to do more work when you realize that there's something to improve. The best example I can give in season 3, and I only bring this up because he's talked about it publicly and he's wanted to talk about it publicly, but we had written, I think 6, 7, 8 scripts for season 3 when I got a call from Louis Herthum, who plays Jacob Monroe, the broker in the show, saying, "Hey, buddy, I just got diagnosed with prostate cancer."
Oh, good.
And he was scared in that moment. He was about to get his first, I forget if it was radiation or chemo, but he was like a week out from having to get his first treatment. And he has talked about, he didn't tell me this at the time, he thought I was going to tell him, well, I feel really bad for you and best of luck, but you can't do the show. Instead, I said, well, your health is the most important thing. I said, what do you want to do? Do you want to do the show, or are you calling me to tell me that you can't do the show? He said, no, I would like to do the show, but I just, and I said, well, let's figure out how that would work then. And what we came up with is, let's give the character a cancer diagnosis, because the cancer and the treatments he was getting was affecting the way that he looked. You can see he looks different in season 2 and season 3. But then it wasn't just, well, let's just say he has cancer. How is that going to affect his relationship with the people in his life, with the woman that we learn? It's okay to do spoilers, I assume, in this, or?
Yeah, we're okay for spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the woman that we learn is his daughter in real life, Isabel, suddenly the cancer is a motivating factor for him trying very hard in this moment to reconnect with her, to try to build a relationship, even though he sort of had abandoned her in her youth, and that they'd had this sort of relationship. It led to very cool things that we had to go back and reconceive and rewrite. I would never say, oh, this would be great to do, but we're 3 weeks out from filming and it would be a lot of work to do it, so let's just not bother. I think one of the things that can be lost in streaming sometimes, when you tend to write all the episodes before you start filming, is that you lose the potential for discovery. You lose the potential to learn something about what's being filmed in earlier episodes, what characters are kind of doing surprising great work opposite each other. The best example I can give of this is going all the way back to The Shield. In season 5, Forrest Whitaker appeared in the show, and he was great. And I had come back from the editing room looking at episode 501 or 502, I think it was. And I came back to the writer's room extraordinarily annoyed, because I was in the editing room, and keep in mind, this is 2005, 2006, 2007, 2006, I think is probably when we filmed this. And I see Forrest Whitaker. I say that because special effects and CGIing things out was much more difficult and more expensive back then. But I'm watching Forrest Whitaker in like episode 2, and he's wearing a wedding ring. And we very clearly stated in episode 1 or before that, episode 2, that he was divorced. And like, I'm like, how did this happen? And I find out that, the actor actually wore his real wedding ring, forgot to take it off. The script supervisor didn't notice. The director didn't notice. My writer on set didn't notice. The prop person didn't notice. Like, it was just a catastrophic failure on many levels. And it's across multiple scenes. And it's just like, oh my God, like, how much is this going to cost us? Money we don't have, and it's probably not going to look great anyways. And I was really, really annoyed. And I was complaining to the writers when I came back to the writers' room about this. And I was just in a foul mood. And then I just closed my eyes for like 15 seconds. And then I opened them and I go, why would a divorced man continue to wear his wedding ring? And it led to this conversation that led to maybe the best episode of that season, where we learned how he hadn't been able to get over this woman's divorce, this mental illness that she had, these things that she was going through. And it led to an episode that we otherwise would never have written. And so to me, one of the dangers in the streaming era is that you think everything's locked and you're too afraid to sort of learn from what you're filming and what you're going through. And so I always try to keep my mind open. I try to get the scripts done early so that you're not scrambling, but then it gives you time if you discover something or you have an actor call and say, hey, I'm ill and I don't know how I'm going to be able to do this. It allows us time to alter the scripts and change things, put scenes into locations for Lewis that would be sort of easy, rather than be outside in the New York cold. We're going to find an interior place to write this to now so that he can be kept comfortable, things like that. So I find it's very useful to have an open mind. This is what's different than film, I think, although obviously you can make discoveries in film. And I try to think if there are other examples. I have a hard time coming up with other examples, but TV is, to me, the one major art form that is constantly living and evolving as your audience is appreciating it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe Dickens, when he was writing serialized stuff, was getting feedback on the first few chapters of something, and it might affect the way he was writing later chapters. That's how TV writers think, right? We're getting feedback from audience, people in our lives who are watching the shows, and, oh, this character is really popping. This is really great. Let me maybe increase some stuff. So I think that's one of the great things about TV, and I would hate to lose that working in the streaming age.
Well, I hope Lewis is going to be okay in the long run as well. Can I ask you a little bit about another show that you've got that's coming out? That's
Sure.
American Hostage, which you're doing for MGM Plus, I believe, and
Correct.
co-showrunning with Eileen Myers.
Yes.
Now, this one is adapted from a podcast that John Hamm was already taking part in.
Yes.
And he's starring in the show as well. How challenging is it to adopt a podcast into a TV series?
Well, I would say that we took elements of the podcast, but really what we were adapting was a real life situation that happened in Indianapolis, Indiana in February of 1977. And so not only did we have the podcast, which was scripted and brought some fictional elements to a real life situation, but we had a ton of research that we were able to do. We went back and found court records from the time. We found old interviews. We found a ton of things. We found out a lot of biographical details on, secondary characters involved in all that allowed us, and really a lot of credit to Eileen, because, I was double dipping between Night Agent and American Hostage, and she was a full-time person. Really a lot of the story stuff, works because of her. And the work that she did. I would sort of come in and hear a pitch from the room, and it was always so good. So really, Eileen deserves a ton of credit for that. But it was combining things from the podcast, combining things that we were learning in our own research, fictional elements that there could not possibly be research in terms of, like, how John Hamm's character Fred, what he might say to his wife, the night that this insane incident happens. Those are the things that you're sort of, adding your sort of Hollywood touch to. But what we found as we dug deeper and deeper was that this story was crazier than we had even imagined after listening to the podcast.
Do you have any idea when that show is likely to air?
Yeah, I have more specific knowledge that I don't know that they would want me to share, but I would say that I think it would be safe to say it would be, you know, late quarter 3 to mid quarter 4. So you can sort of say sometime between August and November of this year, I think is what the current plan is. Obviously in TV things can always change,
Sure.
but I think that's the plan and the schedule that we're working on.
Were there any issues with that show? Because you mentioned there that you were also working on Night Agent at the same time that you're doing that show, in terms of how you kind of divide time or split responsibilities. And also, at the time that you're doing Night Agent, you're under a Netflix deal, but the American Hostage setup is under a previous Sony deal. Does that complicate matters at all for you, or?
A little bit, but I had carved out this project when I went over to Netflix, so they always knew it was a possibility that it might get picked up and that I might work on it. But as you point out, I get paid by Netflix, probably, so my priority was, you know, Night Agent wasn't filming the same time as American Hostage, so I would say that was my saving grace. And I've been used to working on multiple projects at once. There was a time when the unit and the Shield were in production at the same time. There were times when Timeless and SWAT were in production at the same time. So I've been able to do in the past, if you hire the right people, if you delegate properly, if you make clear what your plan and your hopes and aspirations are with your partners, then things go easily. Someone like Eileen, who is so talented and so wonderful and had such a great grasp on the story and such a great idea of where she wanted to go creatively, she made it very easy. By this point, by the time we started filming American Hostage, I was actually done editing season 3 of Night Agent, and we were getting into, starting a writer's room in season 4. So I had the ability to, especially with the quality of the writers I have in the Night Agent who have experience on the show, I had the right partners, so I was able to do both.
Okay. If I was to ask you to take a kind of an eagle eye view from a showrunner in your position at this point in time, someone hugely experienced with a huge legacy of shows behind them, who's worked for major studios, for linear networks, for cable, and for streaming. State of the industry at this point in time, after a lot of the recent challenges that we've had from mergers, from COVID, from strikes, from the production contraction issues that the industry's faced. How do you think things kind of feel to you at this point in time, in terms of where potentially the industry might be going over the next 18 months?
Big questions. Listen, I've been doing this a long time. I moved to Los Angeles 36 years ago as a 23-year-old, trying to make in TV. I'd won a playwriting award that brought me out to Los Angeles for 2 weeks, and they offered me a round trip ticket. And I said I only needed the ticket to Los Angeles. I didn't need the ticket back home to Illinois. That was going to stay. And it took me like 5.5 years before I started getting steady work in the business. So I'm old enough to remember when there were only 4 networks, and then HBO as a 5th network might make 1 show a year. So there were only about 80, 85 shows that were hiring writers every year in TV at that time. And then there was maybe another dozen or 20 in the syndicated market, sort of low budget, Hercules, Xena Warrior, Sweet Valley High. That was a show I interviewed for and got rejected from. So I remember when the jobs were even more scarce. For those people who are newer to the business, understandably, this feels like a scary time because we have lost 20 to 25% of the number of shows from 2022 to now. That is the contraction. We had all these streamers who spent like drunken sailors because they were chasing market share and weren't worried about profits. A tech attitude came that like it's okay to lose a lot of money at first, the way that Amazon did as a company, so long as you're establishing these connections with consumers and you're establishing a pattern of them buying from you, you can pivot to profitability afterwards. So you had all these places making more shows than they probably should have, spending bigger budgets on these shows than they probably should have to try to get market share. And I was actually filming season 1 of The Night Agent in 2022 at a time when our Netflix exec, Tara Flynn, was actually coming up to Vancouver to visit us. I was with her the day that Netflix stock tanked, like, I forget, 20%, like in one day, where all of a sudden Wall Street said, forget about market share. We want to see if you can be profitable.
Yeah.
So I was there on that day. So it feels scary in the short term because there are a lot of people that were working 3 years ago that aren't working now. And so I have extraordinary sympathy for the writers, the actors, directors, the crew members that are finding work much harder to get. But I have been around long enough to have seen that there used to be a time when there was even less work than there is now. I do worry about media consolidation and fewer buyers. I think there's something that's probably very good for the world that's probably bad for me personally and Hollywood, which is that local productions around the world are getting better and better at making shows that appeal to their homegrown audiences. You know, that's great for those regions and for those people. That just increases the and by the way, they're tending to do it in ways that are a lot cheaper than we do in the United States. But the days of kind of American TV programming being by far the most dominant form, I think, are getting chipped away at. But that's probably for the good, for the world. It just makes it tougher for people in Los Angeles here and for me. So I think, you know, I also worry, you know, you keep hearing these reports, you keep hearing anecdotal stories from professors in colleges that students are coming in and they don't have the patience to read a whole book, or students are in film classes and they have a hard time seeing through a 2-hour movie without looking at their phones. I worry about that. And is our attention span getting cut down to a TikTok length thing? You keep hearing about these vertical shorts. But technology has always threatened Hollywood, and Hollywood has always bounced back. A lot of concerns about AI. I don't know where it's all going to lead. But what I do know is that there is a hunger in this world for well-written, well-produced storytelling that has meaning to people and that brings people together. People still like talking about, did you see The Night Agent? Did you see Stranger Things? You know, did you see White Lotus? There is still that need at TV and at a movie level for programming that makes us feel things and that we know other people are watching. That's where I just don't understand why people think the minute anyone can sort of create an AI movie in their bedroom, well, you watch it, but somebody else is going to watch their AI movie, and then there's no conversation to be had about any of this. So I'm not as pessimistic as some people, but it's a very challenging time in the business. I think we're going to see in the TV space, we already are seeing it. I'm not Nostradamus here. A real downward pressure on budgets. These TV shows got too expensive for the eyeballs they were attracting. I welcome that. I think that advantages someone like me who has a history of making shows on budget and well. But the day and age of the $20 million to $25 million episode of TV, big spectacle, I think you'll see occasional things of that. HBO will still probably lean into, you know, a Game of Thrones type thing. Netflix will make a big thing. But I think with the success of a show like The Pit, I think The Night Agent, you know, was a very affordably priced show. In our first season, it got more expensive in success. But, you know, I do think the future is more shows like those made on a TV budget that respect what's different about TV than movies. I think the movieization of TV has actually hurt the business.
Do you feel some people are saying that old TV is new TV to a certain extent?
Well, I think there are some universal truths that people are rediscovering. I mean, I was having dinner with my adult age son last night, and I said, have you know, and he loves The Pit. And I said, have you ever seen any of ER? And he said, no. I said, well, John Wells, one of the guys behind The Pit is, did ER. I said, you really should watch the first, you should watch the pilot episode. It's a 2-hour pilot episode, made George Clooney a star. Noah Wiley was the young kid in that. And he said he's going to watch it. But we shouldn't be shocked that a really well-written, well-produced medical drama revolving around an emergency room can be successful. We've seen it. So in those ways, what's always new. At the same time, there's always going to be a hunger for what I haven't seen before, for a show like Severance, right? That's showing me something that I haven't seen. I do think Game of Thrones was revolutionary at the time when it came out. I do egotistically like to think that The Shield was revolutionary when it came out, not because that there weren't a whole lot of other cop shows, but because we allowed ourselves to do a cop show that had a very different perspective than everything else people were watching. So there's always going to be an appetite for what is new, fresh, an idea we've never seen before. But then there is going to be that appetite for shows in familiar genres, made for a price, that introduce stars rather than paying big stars big money just to get eyeballs. They always just say TV makes stars. We had this period of time where it was all about, well, what big movie star can you get to come star in your TV show? There's still going to be an element to that, but I think we are starting to see a reversion back to what worked for decades in TV.
You're going to be part of the WGA negotiating committee for the new round.
I already am. It's not going to be. I'm in the middle of it. Yeah.
It's already started, has it?
Well, not the official negotiations, but our internal conversations and our meetings with members, our drafting of proposals, all those things have begun in earnest.
Okay. I know you can't really speak about it in any kind of depth or detail, but I'm just wondering, does the general vibe seem hopeful that further strikes could be avoided this year?
That's not going to be up to me. There's a new executive director for the AMPTP, Greg Hessinger, I believe is his name. I haven't met him. I'm told that he's making different noises than the previous leadership group, which frankly, I think approached us very antagonistically over the years, because this is the 6th time I've been on a negotiating committee. And I never understood. It's a shame to me that there isn't more cooperation. As somebody on the Writers Guild side, I'd like to put it on the AMPTP. I'm sure those members would point the fingers over at us and the DJ and SAG. It would make more sense to be on friendlier terms with the companies, because the competition is not merely just between us and them for higher wages, for better benefits. The competition is for a healthier industry to compete with video games, to compete with music, to compete with digital shorts, to compete with all these things. So what I would say to that question is, it's my hope. Every year in opening statements, Carol Lombardini, who was the executive director over there, would say, we're partners in this business. And then she would spend the next number of weeks acting like anything other than a partner to us. She would act like an adversary to us. I would love it if that vibe changed, and that if not just with words, but in deeds, we were treated more like partners. And it would be great if that relationship between the Writers Guild and the other unions strengthened with the companies, so that we could make sure that this was a great business to work in, and that the product was a great product that could continue to be the envy of the world.
Well, I hope that's the way it does work out, because from the outside looking in, that would seem to be the approach that would make the most sense. Because, as you say, it's a dependent ecosystem where, it's going to work much better if you can work in a more unified stance against all of the increasing competition for eyeballs that's out there.
Yeah, listen, one of the things I've learned through 6 negotiating committees is that common sense doesn't always prevail. There's this weird kabuki theater around collective bargaining that mandates that you have a stony poker face in the room and don't laugh at their jokes, and all this sort of stuff that that I find hard to square with the rest of my life, but that just, is the way that it is. It would be nice if some of that thawed a little bit.
I think I'd do one last question with you, and then there's a little thing we do at the end of the podcast each week called Creator's Choice, which is kind of like very short, fast answers to kind of questions about your current cultural consumption, if you like,
Okay.
if you were on for doing that.
Sure.
The last question, I saw in an interview there a little while ago, you were talking about that you were working on a new pilot as well for an idea that you thought had never been done in television before, which I was very curious about. I don't know if you can say anything about that or where that might potentially be at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm working on 2 projects for Netflix at the moment. One is the aforementioned one. I really don't want to say
Sure.
The Arena, but it's a world I haven't seen on TV before. The other one is a world we've seen before, but again, I'm really thinking hard about how it can be a take on the world you haven't seen before. I really don't want to say anything of that. The first one, I have a draft. I've got notes rewriting. The other one, I've sort of pitched in loose form, and I probably will go to script soon on. But I don't like to jinx things. People know the shows I've made. They don't know the things I tried hard to get made that I never could. So I've had a lot of scripts and ideas that I really fell in love with that I couldn't get made, and and as a result, I never count anything happening until they actually happen. So I'm just focused on making these scripts as good as they can be and trying to tempt Netflix into making one or both of them.
Well, I look forward to seeing it, whatever it may be. Hopefully it comes to pass, and hopefully season 4 of Night Agent as well, because I've been really enjoying the show so far.
Thank you so much.
For anybody who's listening, it is well worth your time checking it out. And then finally, if we could maybe just try and do Creator's Corner with you. Like I say, it's basically numbers between 1 and 10. If you give me a number, I will ask you a question that relates to your current cultural consumption and just help us get a vibe in terms of what's interesting you.
Well, I was an athlete for a long time, and whenever I had a choice of uniform numbers, I would always choose prime numbers. Don't ask me why. So if you're asking me, I'm only gonna choose at the beginning prime numbers. So I'll say 3.
Okay. 3, most recent movie seen at the cinema.
I'm fortunate that I have a pretty great home theater. um, Sorry to say, I do. And because I'm in the Writers Guild and my wife is in SAG, we get all the screeners of like the awards. So I watched a lot of them in my home. I've seen most of the movies that are up for Oscars and everything. I did go, Gabriel Basso, who stars in The Night Agent, he had a great role in Catherine Bigelow's House of Dynamite, which was a Netflix movie, but they had a limited 1-week release in LA, and I took all the Night Agent writers and assistants to go see that. And then I went and saw One Battle After Another in IMAX in the fall.
It was a great film.
But I probably watched 20, 25 movies in my home theater. So I sound like somebody that's not supporting the movie industry, but I feel like I am. And then I did, for Christmas, I got my adult daughter who lives in New York. I got her an AMC Stubs membership for Christmas so that she can see all the movies.
Would you have another number?
7 is a good prime number.
7. What song or album do you have on blast at the moment?
Let me look. I tend to put playlists together more than actual albums. My music tends to go towards older rather than newer.
Would you be 70s, 80s vibe or?
Yeah, I would say 60s into 2000s.
Right.
We have an actress who's on American Hostage who's a musician, and I've been listening to her music. Kat Cunning is her name.
Okay.
I dig her stuff, and I admitted to her that I have a real penchant for Christmas music, and she has a wonderful version of "Oh Holy Night" that's really great. So, yeah, I listen to a lot of Christmas music when I write, which is odd, but I explain it that I actually need music that I know so well that I can tune it out when I really get into a groove writing, if that makes sense. And I don't want music that's too bombastic and hard while I'm writing. when I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, filming a lot of episode 1 from The Night Agent season 3, it was December, it was Christmas season, and I was hearing a lot of international global Christmas music.
What do Turkish Christmas songs sound like?
Well, it's not necessarily Turkish.
Okay.
Like some of it was Spanish. Yeah, like I have there. Oops, I'm playing. There's an album called Feliz Christmas that had all these different Christmas songs in Spanish that I thought were great. So I was listening to that a lot.
Okay. I don't know if you've time for one more or not. I know we're slightly over.
Sure.
Give me one more number then.
Well, the only other prime number between 1 and 10 would be 2.
Well, actually, this one should be in your wheelhouse. Last streaming show you watched that you can't stop recommending to people.
It's interesting. I feel like I'm not answering any of these questions great. What I find is I'm so busy working that I tend to watch a lot of first episodes of things, especially if I hear them talked about. I did watch The Beast in Me on Netflix, which I liked.
Right.
I thought Matthew Rhys in particular was really great in that show. One of our new writers on The Night Agent, he was also a writer on American Hostage. Mike Scarrett is his name. He was a writer on that show. So I kind of started to watch to be able to say to him that I watched, and I really enjoyed it and thought it was good. I tend to watch a lot of docuseries on streaming, a lot of true crime stuff. I watched a documentary that I thought was quite good on a serial killer in Long Island. That was on Netflix. Not a series, but I just finished watching last night. I think it was a documentary from 2019, just called Apollo 11. That's all this archival footage of the trip to the moon that was kind of surprisingly moving in terms of what we accomplished as a human race on that. I found that really interesting. So I guess technically I would say The Beast in Me, but I love docuseries as well.
It's weird that Artemis 2 is going to be the first time back in so many years as well after all that. Shawn, thank you so much for the time today and for talking to us. I really, really appreciate it. The best of luck with all future projects, and hopefully, potentially, I know I saw in another interview you mentioned the possibility of taking The Night Agent to Europe. Maybe some of that might be set in Ireland, maybe somewhere down the line if you were interested in coming over.
I'm half Irish and I've never been to Ireland. And it's something that for about the last 3 years, I've talked about really regretting that I haven't made it there yet. And my daughter really would like to go. My wife would like to go. I find that I travel to places where we film. So I got to find a reason to write something in Ireland.
Well, we would absolutely love to have that. We would love to have you over if there's any way we can potentially help in making that happen. I would love to do that. But
thank you.
In the meantime, thank you again. I really, really appreciate the time, and best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to State of the Arts. We hope you enjoyed your time with us and that you can join us again in 2 weeks for a new episode. Until then, please remember that art matters.